high-stakes meeting looms at the White House next week, where President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are set to chart the future of the Middle East. The agenda couldn't be more intense, finalizing a 60-day Gaza ceasefire, freeing all the remaining hostages, and expanding the Abraham Accords. What exactly is on the table, and how will both leaders balance domestic pressures with regional strategy? We're covering it all today on Israel Undiplomatic.
Welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm your host, Mark Regev, and I'm here with my partner and co-host, Ruthie Blum, who's back from New York City, where she was for the last 3 weeks. Welcome back, Ruthie.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here, and it's sort of interesting that I arrived just after the end of the 12-day war, and now who's taking my place in America? Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is on his way over the weekend. He's going to be traveling to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Trump.
And it's a very serious meeting. And the first thing that needs to be said is this summit between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Israel is the third time these two men are going to meet since President Trump took office on January 20th. This is Netanyahu's third invitation to the White House. I don't think there's a single foreign leader who's been there twice, and Netanyahu's already there for the third time. And I think that says something. It's very, I think it's almost emblematic of the strength of the relationship between Israel and the United States. It's also emblematic, I think, of the relationship between the two leaders themselves. To be invited for a third time, what is it, less than 6 month period or just over 6? No, it's less than 6 months. It is truly, I think, amazing. And they've got a lot on their plate to discuss. It's not, they're not going to go there to drink tea and have a piece of cake. Yeah, there's a lot of very serious diplomacy that needs to be on the table. And maybe we should talk with our viewers about what that is.
Okay, you know what else is unprecedented? Not just that Netanyahu has been there. This will be his third visit to the White House. What's also unprecedented is this is the first time that the United States and Israel have fought a war jointly. Israel prepared the way. Israel on Friday the 13th attacked Iran, the Iranian nuclear facilities. And then after accomplishing a lot there on the facilities, Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders and various other things, missile launchers, etc., the United States entered and then bombed the three main nuclear sites. It was an amazing victory. I don't care what anyone says. I know we've heard, it wasn't a victory. It was. It was amazing. And the pilots and both air forces deserve incredible kudos. So that was unprecedented. So part of what they're going to be talking about, obviously, is the aftermath of this success.
So let's talk about that. Because it's clear the Iranian nuclear program and the Iranian ballistic missile program was largely dismantled in this current round of fighting. Right? If anything's left over, it's underneath a lot of rubble. And we've set back the Iranians a significant time, whether it's 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, no one can answer that today. But there's no doubt the Iranians were very, very close to getting a bomb, and now they're much further away. And you've got to add to the physical destruction, we spoke about this last week, you have to add the destruction of their chief scientists. And I used the analogy last week. I want to say it again. Imagine if the Japanese had bombed New Mexico at the beginning of 1945 and taken out all those top scientists who were there in Los Alamos working on the Manhattan Project. It would have crippled the program. And that's exactly what we did in taking out all those leading nuclear scientists. So you've got the physical damage and you've got the intellectual damage. And you put that together, we're in a good place. But the question is, where do we go from here? There's one optimistic sign. President Trump was asked specifically by a journalist, what would he do if the Iranians started to reestablish their nuclear program? And I have to presume they plan to do so at some stage when they can. That's the nature of their regime. They're not suddenly going to become good global citizens. Yes, the Ayatollah regime is a disgusting, extremist, hateful regime, and it's not going to change. It doesn't show any signs of changing yet. What will you do if they start trying to reconstitute their nuclear program? And the president said, without batting an eyebrow, he said, we will go in again. I'm not quoting directly, but that was the message.
Right. And this is why, and I think it's an important point we have to make, because another item on the agenda, first of all, the aftermath of this amazing, amazing feat is the reconstitution, or beginning again, reinitiation of the Abraham Accords, the peace accords. That's what Trump has said all along. I'm going to be the peace president, peacemaker, peace. And by the way, so does Netanyahu. He has said all along, before the October 7th massacre, he was engaged. He was the peacemaker. He was trying to get Saudi Arabia on board with the Abraham Accords, and it was looking like it was going in that direction. So that's one thing, the aftermath of the Iran war, and the what happens now in Gaza with the hostages. And now Steve Witkoff, his envoy, has presented another plan, and Israel has accepted the plan, and now we're waiting for Hamas. These are all on the table, but I just want to make a point about what you said about President Trump. There are people, a lot of people who hate Trump, take him literally, not seriously. They make fun of him. They take him literally, his posts on social media, etc. They've been making fun of his coming out with a new perfume called Victory. And then there's those of us who take him seriously, not literally. And I think that he has proven himself again and again, despite whatever he has said. He has said many encouraging things on Truth Social, his social media platform. And some of them are worrisome to Israelis. And he always pulls through. And now we have to trust him, because everything he says, he said to Iran, look, you can do this the easy way or the hard way. He was about to make a deal with Iran. And many of us said, oh, no, what is this? Obama all over again? No. He said, you do this the easy way or the hard way. And Iran didn't play ball. And the best thing about this is it just showed that now Iran is not this huge this thing that the whole world was afraid of. We actually saw that it wasn't so hard, after years of planning, wasn't so hard to take out their missile launchers and their nuclear facilities, as you said, their scientists. The point is, he defanged this golem in the world, and that's amazing. And now when he said to Gaza, he hinted the same to Hamas. You can do this. You can do this the easy way or the hard way. So I now am trusting in President Trump. I also trust Prime Minister Netanyahu not to make any bad deals. And what I'm saying is that all the naysayers keep being proven wrong.
Can I say on this point, and before we go to the other issues, I want to do just a touch more on Iran. On the assumption that Iran tries to reconstitute its ballistic missile program or reconstitute its nuclear program, Israel probably would have a lower threshold than the United States. In other words, President Trump said, if they try to reconstitute the program, America could act again. All very good. But Israel's level of accepting the threat is probably lower than America's level. We're a regional power. We're closer. They say we should be wiped off the map. They want to destroy America too, but they use maybe, most of their flowery languages for us. And so I think we have a lower threshold. And I think one of the things that the Prime Minister needs to talk to the President about is, that we reserve the right, if we see them reconstituting the program, to act like we acted on Friday the 13th, which turned out to be a lucky Friday. Yes, not an unlucky Friday. That we reserve the right to act, and that he gives us, if not a green light, at least a yellow light, that Israel, in the framework of the Iranians, they haven't committed to inspectors. They haven't committed to any deal. The president said he wants to try to do a deal with them. At the moment, they're not willing even to do anything. And so that Israel has, as their understandings are reached at the White House on Monday, that Israel, if it needs to act, will act. I think that's very important. And the Americans continue to supply us with the equipment that make us capable of acting.
I have no doubt that that'll happen. Why? Because we've seen also in Gaza, I'm sorry, whatever, occasionally President Trump says something like he posted on Truth Social. Okay, end the war. Let's get the hostages out, end the war. So he has not prevented Israel from doing what it needs to do, not once since he entered office, not once. Not when Israel said, okay, we've got to go back in with a new operation in Gaza, a stronger one. Did Trump say you shouldn't be doing this? Not once. Did he prevent Israel from launching the attack on Friday the 13th? No. First of all, that was clearly in coordination. We now know in retrospect it was in coordination with the White House. But forget about that for a moment. I have no doubt that if Netanyahu says to him, look, we're on board with everything here, but any deal we make, whether it's with Iran or it's with Hamas, anything that's cooking, any violation or any movement, as Israel has done with Hezbollah. Have you heard a complaint from the Trump administration? One, when Israel's continuing to fight Hezbollah, despite a ceasefire. It was an official ceasefire, and yet any movement of weapons, terrorists, we say, no, we're not tolerating it. And we won't tolerate it in Syria either. So I have no doubt that is, you're right, he'll discuss it, and I have no doubt.
No, but actually, what you've said is can give us a certain amount of optimism, because those agreements were reached after the fighting in Lebanon and the Lebanon ceasefire, so that they can form the basis of similar understandings vis-a-vis Iran. That if there are violations, and they're not violations because there's no agreement yet, but if we do see the Iranians start moving ahead on missiles or on nuclear weapons or other things that we think are a strategic game changer, we have freedom of action to go in and take out and destroy any new reconstituted program. But you talked about Gaza, and we need to talk about this because just last night the president put on his Truth Social that there's a deal now. He said that Netanyahu had agreed to the deal. The ball is in Hamas's court. We've been there before. We all know that. For some sort of ceasefire deal that gets the hostages out. It won't be a perfect deal. Apparently, it won't get all hostages out. But the big issue here is so far, Hamas has held out releasing all the hostages until they can get a written guarantee that they can stay in power in Gaza. And I don't think that's a bridge too far for Israel. Because for Hamas to stay in power in Gaza, even though Hamas isn't as strong as Hezbollah in Lebanon or as Iran, they are the junior partner in the axis of evil or the axis of terror, whatever you want to call it. But they have the ability to hurt us because they're so close to us. We saw that they did on October 7th. If they stay in power in Gaza, it's only a matter of time before you get another October 7th. That's the bottom line. They will reconstitute their military, their terror system. They will reestablish total control over Gaza through internal terror. And it's just kicking the can down the road. I don't think we can, in Israel, agree to a ceasefire that leaves Hamas in power, and that the people who live in Israel South, on all those border communities, look across the frontier fence and they see Hamas. No, when this is over, Hamas can no longer be the group that runs the Gaza Strip. I can't see Israel compromising on that.
No, and it's not just whether they run the strip or not, because, they have a way of manipulating the discussion. Because there's some talk of they're saying, okay, we agree not to run Gaza, but we're not going to demilitarize. We'll have another Palestinian group running Gaza, which also we can't accept. Palestinian Authority, no way, no how, okay? So there is that problem of afterwards. I have a question too. Some people have said to me, we don't understand it. This is a rogue terrorist organization leading around the United States and Israel and Europe by the tail by saying, we've got your hostages. Go now. What are you going to do? Okay. Anytime you fight with us, you're killing innocent people. You're killing innocent civilians, and they still have those hostages. Now, here's what I'm going to ask you. What if, we made a deal, and not only that, in exchange for those hostages, not enough that we stop firing. They expect hundreds and hundreds of bloodthirsty terrorists to be released from Israeli jails. That's another thing that is really crucial here. So here's my question. So you make a deal with Hamas, so you agree to it, you get the hostages out, and then we violate it. What about that? Why do we owe this evil group any kind of guarantees, international guarantees? Why? The reason I'm asking you that is I'm aware that we're not going to do that. I'm saying people have said to me, we don't understand. So make a deal with them. Just get the hostages out and then blitz. Then do whatever you have to do. Or let the prisoners let the terrorists out of jail and kill them on the buses on their way out. And you know what? I don't know why we can't do that. Why? Because we'll get international condemnation.
We're getting it.
We have it anyway.
Yeah.
We have it anyway. So I am aware that that's a naive presentation, but I'm saying it that way. Just say there's a moral and an immoral equation here. There's something going on here that, and to if any deal that's made with Hamas, you do realize that all it is doing is signaling to every terrorist group in the world, whether they're Arab terrorists or not, that all you got to do is kidnap people from the West. And then you've got them. You got them by the short hairs, as they say, because we care about each individual. And so honestly, I think that that's also a huge danger. It's not just if they're in power, the people in the South will be in danger of another October 7th. Everyone will be in danger. Every American, every Jew, everybody walking around innocently on the streets of Europe and are targets for kidnap.
I think that's correct. And I think if Hamas stays in power, they'll portray this as a great victory. We saw in the last round of hostage releases how each time there was a released hostage, you saw the Hamas in their pressed, dry cleaned uniforms, showing that they're the ones, in power, that they're this force, that they've stood up to Israel. They'll portray anything that allows them, any deal that allows them to stay in power as a huge victory. And that will energize their own radical base. That'll energize extremist Islamists across the Middle East. I dare to say across the world. A victory for Hamas is a victory for extremism, not only in Gaza, it's a victory for extremism across the planet. And to have taken out Hezbollah the way we have, to have taken on Iran the way we have, but to leave Hamas in power, who started this whole thing, I don't think Israel can do that. I know it's a difficult war. I know the problem of the hostages is a very serious issue. We want them back. I say, do a limited deal if you can. Get as many live hostages out as you can. Everyone you get out, that's a major, we say in Judaism, it's a mitzvah, right? It's a great thing. Everyone we can get out, that's a good thing to get them out. Can we get them all out? I hope so. I don't know so. But we've got to try to get as many out as we can. Trump is talking about a deal for 60 days, during which there'll be discussions on a permanent sort of solution. I hope it's possible. I'm very cynical if Hamas will agree to voluntarily disarm, that Hamas will agree to voluntarily demilitarize Gaza, to voluntarily leave power. Maybe today they're going to be willing to do things they weren't willing to do a few weeks ago, precisely because they've lost their two most important friends, Hezbollah and the Iranians. It's clear that Iran's not going to have a lot of cash to help them rebuild now. Has there been a change in the constellation of forces, the way that they look at themselves? Are the people in Gaza suddenly going to rise up against Hamas? There are many moving parts. But at this point, I think if it's possible to do a deal that at least gets a significant proportion of the hostages out, I think that's probably worth doing.
Well, okay, Netanyahu agreed to it. Yeah. Okay, worth doing or not worth doing, he agreed to it. And Hamas, of course, will not agree to it. It'll up some ante. What happens with this deal, we don't know. But here's another thing. That meeting in Washington that's about to take place, it's not just, a lot of these things could be discussed over the phone. I think it's very significant that this is a meeting in person. That's also been, we hear that Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer is there already preparing this meeting and somehow. So I'm beginning to think, given all the evidence we've seen leading up to this, that there's something else cooking behind the scenes that we don't know anything about.
So I have an idea.
Relevant, by the way, to pressure and maybe from Saudi Arabia and from Qatar. We don't know. But Trump has been using his leverage and his friendship. We saw how his trip to the Middle East with the Saudis, he was just gave them a warm bath, but it comes with a price tag. And I am hoping that what we don't know about that meeting is going to be more significant than what we do know right now.
So just briefly on Gaza, I'd remind you and all our viewers that every time we did get a significant release of hostages, first was I believe, in November 23, and then last year, they always happened after Israel surprised Hamas militarily. The first big release of hostages happened after Israel surprised them all, and we actually went into Gaza City, into Shifa Hospital, and went to the Hamas headquarters. And they were very worried, and they wanted a ceasefire. They released hostages. The second big release of hostages came after Hezbollah was defeated and agreed to a ceasefire. And Hezbollah said, we will never, give up the gun as long as you're fighting in Gaza. And suddenly they were willing to give up the gun, so to speak. And so now with the defeat of Iran, there is a chance. There is a chance to get a deal. What you're talking about, and now in Gaza and what's going to happen in the conversation between prime ministers, there's things you can discuss on the phone. There are things you need to do face to face. And the really important stuff you need to do face to face. There's no substitute for that. And I think maybe here, the issue of the 60-day ceasefire, when we're going to look for other solutions together with the Americans, how to square this circle of Hamas no longer being in Gaza, Hamas no longer having control, that Gaza being demilitarized. Is it possible this plays into something that, we've talked about in the past, the Abraham Accords and peace deals, that this is where the Arab states can come in and fill the vacuum in Gaza and provide a framework for Hamas to exit the stage, not just in words, but in deeds, with their guns and so forth. And there'll be some Arab entity that will take control of the civil society in Gaza. It's clear we will have to have the overall security envelope for the foreseeable future. But there'll be some deal which will include, and now we need to discuss it, the expansion of the Abraham Accords, the expansion of normalization of relations between Israel and Arab countries. Last night on the news, people were talking about the possibility of Saudi Arabia and Oman normalizing their ties.
And Syria.
No, that's
Syria
different.
came
Syria's
into
different.
the discussion, though.
Yes, but Syria's not talking about total normalization because no one's in Israel is talking about giving up our side of the Golan Heights, right? And so people are talking about maybe a non-belligerency or recognition, something that's less than full normalization, but something that's very significant also. And of course, if the Syrians do something, who will follow suit automatically? The Lebanese, because they have every interest and they want to have a better relationship with Israel. They just have to be part of the regional consensus. They won't do it by themselves. So is it possible that there are moving parts here and that in the 60 days, if we do get this ceasefire, you get movement on Arab states? And I would say, ask the following question. For those four things, for a normalization with Saudi Arabia and Oman, and for a breakthrough with Syria and Lebanon, can Israel be a little more flexible on some of the future aspects of what happens in Gaza? I'm not saying be flexible on security. No, don't be flexible. We cannot be flexible on security. We've been through October 7th. We don't want to do it again. But on some of the political envelope, can we be more flexible? I think if it's possible to have that breakthrough with the Arab world, I would say yes.
Probably. But I'm thinking, yes, the peace is busting out all over, yet it isn't yet, on the other hand. And we know that. We know that Netanyahu, both Trump and Netanyahu, who both began the Abraham Accords and during Trump's first term, we know that that's what they're aiming for. But I would suggest something. Maybe it's just wishful thinking on my part. I'm sure it is. That it's not just during these 60 days there'll be movement on the Abraham Accords. But maybe we're having another slight fake out going on here about the 60 days. And there's some surprise being cooked up for Hamas, some kind of military surprise. I mean, we saw what happened with the beepers and Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. We've seen so many events happen that we didn't expect that took the enemies by surprise, as we saw in Iran. We saw that with Hezbollah. And for all you know, that while this is going on in discussions with the Arab world, etc., simultaneously, we're preparing a surprise for Hamas, and I certainly hope so, that doesn't endanger the hostages. Obviously, we don't know how not to endanger them. Any move we make endangers them. And this has been a real problem for our winning the war in Gaza. I'm just wondering if there is not some trick up their sleeves now.
So we're already doing something in that direction. Is we've been intensifying military operations against Hamas. We've been doing that for the last, since the war with Iran finished. And the idea is basically, the President of the United States says they do a deal or else. So Israel good cop, bad cop. We're the bad cop. We're doing the all or else. In other words, Israel is being very effective in our military operation, taking out Hamas, taking over more and more neighborhoods in Gaza, destroying Hamas infrastructure. That is, in many ways, it's difficult, it's incremental, but it's happening, and Hamas feels it every day. And here we need to say a word, with your permission. There's so much stuff in the international media about discrediting the American-Israeli system for delivering aid. And while you were in Washington, just a few days ago, New York, sorry, Washington decided to give another 30 million or 33 million US dollars to this aid program. And of course, the UN is against it, because why aren't you using the UN system? And UNRWA's against it. Everyone's against it. The truth is, this is what really scares Hamas. The fact that they no longer can control the aid going to Gaza, because the aid is their patronage. It's how they keep civil control. The UN organizations that work in Gaza have been commandeered by Hamas. They've been taken over by Hamas. It's clear that it's part of the Hamas network to maintain power. And so I think the combination of the commitment we have to create another system that is working, and the commitment we have to use military force, and Iran and Hezbollah being defeated, could this create a climate where we can have a breakthrough? Maybe. We can hope so.
Yeah, so the one thing, you're absolutely right. That's what we've been doing. But the reason I said maybe some surprise is waiting for them is because what we're not doing, or we're being careful not to do, is attack the area where we believe the hostages are being held. And that's the tricky part here, because we don't want to harm them. And I'll tell you, all the hostages who survived, who were returned, have said, almost all of them have said, when we were in the tunnels and anytime we heard IDF troops, we were scared. We heard bombs, and our captors said, if they come near us, we'll kill you, etc. And a lot of the Stop the War Now people using those statements by freed hostages as a way to say we have to end the war right away. But one thing they don't quote, those same freed hostages, all of whom have said that there's not a single innocent civilian in Gaza. All those who say we heard IDF explosions and we feared for our lives, and yes, we have to get them, all the rest of our brothers and sisters, out of there. But they also said there is no innocent civilian in Gaza. And the reason I'm saying that is not because I know for sure. It's for two reasons. One is because the media, interestingly, doesn't echo that. Only echoes the end the war because the IDF is endangering them. That's one. And the other is that we really have not seen any righteous Gentiles coming out of Gaza. That's it. Not one.
That came up at the White House the last time I think the president met with a group of hostages. He asked them, was there any single Gazan who was nice and bought you extra food or looked after you? In all the stories of the different places in Europe where Jews were hiding in a different position, there are stories of people risking their lives even to help, and nothing in Gaza.
None.
Nothing.
Not from women, not from children.
And on the contrary, you have people on UN salaries who are theoretically working for humanitarian organizations who are abusing hostages, right?
Exactly.
On a UN salary.
Exactly. And to say one thing, it is true that when you are terrorized by leadership like that, you're afraid to help. Maybe you'd be afraid to help a hostage because your life is in danger. But let me remind you that during the Holocaust, you want to tell me that the righteous Gentiles who protected Jews, who hid them in their cellars, did whatever they could to help Jews, they weren't afraid of the Nazis? Of course they were. That's why we have a whole section at Yad Vashem dedicated to those righteous Gentiles. Not a single one has come forth in Gaza, not one. So what I'm saying is,
isn't that interesting? We've got like over 100 live hostages have come home, and not one has spoken, not one, about a Gazan Palestinian who helped them, who was nice to them.
On the contrary. So the reason that's even relevant is because the focus of the media always is, what about all the innocent Palestinians in Gaza? That's one. And the other is, the IDF has to stop its operations because it's endangering the hostages. So I just we really have to stress the other side of that coin.
But let's be honest, and we know this to be true. Obviously, IDF operations can inadvertently kill the hostages, or if IDF soldiers are close to hostages and their captors can murder them, there is a risk involved. But then you always have to balance that risk with what about the risk of doing nothing? The risk of doing nothing is also risky. It means that the hostages are there under their abuse. They're being starved. They're being beaten. Who knows what? And you are prolonging that captivity, which can bring their deaths closer as well. So if you want a no-risk strategy, I like to joke, go and live in New Zealand. It's not in the real world.
No, absolutely. And that's why I'm praying. You see, the thing is, the only way to have a good outcome, I mean, every outcome here, some will be better than others, but there's no good choice right now. There are no good choices, not really good ones in that respect. But that's why I
want to say one thing, though. When you say there are no innocent people in Gaza, okay? And first of all, I look at, Gaza's had before the war, I don't know how many are still there, 2 million people. A lot of them have left. That's why I say a lot of them have left quietly and secretly. And let's say half of them are people under the age of 14, right? Okay, I don't hold children, even though they go to Hamas summer camps and they're taught to hate us and so forth. I still believe, as Jews, as Israelis, we have a humanitarian responsibility. We don't want to harm these people. I don't think you want to harm them either. And I think we have to make it clear that when you say, and I don't use those words, use those words, I think you need to say, that there are no innocent people in Gaza means you're not saying all of them are legitimate targets for the IDF to kill. You're not saying that, I hope.
No, and nor did I say there are no innocent people in Gaza. I said the freed hostages said it, and I said it in the context.
Correct.
I said it in the context
correct.
of their saying that the IDF is endangering. They said that, and they said that. And the media focuses only on the part that the IDF is endangering them. I didn't say there are no innocents in Gaza. I said that is what the released hostages have said. And I have said there have been no righteous Gentiles, and that is a fact. That is a fact. As for the children and whether it's not a question of whether I hold them responsible or not. That is not an issue. I am saying that because we're in this catch with this evil group holding our hostages, what we need, there has to be some trick to be able to get them out of there and kill their captors without endangering them. That's what I'm praying for.
We have to finish up now, so I'll ask like a yes or no question. We talked about 3 issues that Netanyahu and Trump are going to talk about. Gaza ceasefire with a hostage deal and all that. Agreements on Iran on how to proceed, and expanding the Abraham Accords. Tell me, what do you think what are the chances in the next week we're going to get some sort of breakthrough on a Gaza ceasefire? Out of 10, give me a number.
5.
I say 7. On American-Israeli understandings on how to deal with Iran?
Oh, 10. High. Is that the high number?
Yeah. I also think 10. That's the thing. Expanding in the next couple of months, bringing in Arab partners, better relationships with those 4 Arab countries I mentioned before, Saudi Arabia and Oman for full peace, and Lebanon and Syria for a better relationship.
Well, I would say it all depends. I would say, between 5 and 8, depending on what are the conditions. And those conditions will also be connected to Gaza and to Iran. I mean, these pieces of the puzzle
are all interconnected.
Together.
5 to 8. And I would say 6 to 9. How's that? A touch more optimistic.
Very good.
All right, I look forward to...
You're always more optimistic than I am.
I think we have to finish, but maybe you should tell the people to keep writing to us.
That's right. We've been remiss in reminding our viewers that you can write to undiplomatic@jns.org to submit questions that we can grapple with on our subsequent episodes. We'd be happy to do so.
That's it for today. See you all again next week.